It is midnight in Washington, 5 a.m. in London, and 2 on a Monday afternoon here in Seoul. I'm Conn-young. Let's get a check of the main stories we're following at this hour. From a 3-year economic plan to her hopes to hold a reunion of families separated by the Korean War for the Lunar New Year to what she does after work, President Park Geun-hye unveils her roadmap for the nation and answers questions from the press during the Korean leader's first ever news conference. The top foreign policymakers from South Korea and the U.S. will meet in Washington this week, and North Korea and Japan are likely to dominate their talks. And wind chills of up to 50 degrees below 0 Celsius are threatening to turn states in the north and northwestern U.S. into an icy deep freeze. Now, that's mainly due to a phenomenon described as polar vortex, which is set to suck super chilled air from the Arctic, sending temperatures plunging. We'll have those stories and more, but let us begin this Monday afternoon with President Park's New Year's press conference, her first since taking office in February last year. Now, speaking directly to the nation earlier this Monday morning, she laid out her plans for state affairs and took questions from reporters on a wide range of issues. During the 80-minute-long conference, the president introduced her plans for the new year, which center on revitalizing the economy, bolstering national security, and reforming the nation's public enterprises. Now, to give us more details on that press conference, we now go live to our presidential office correspondent Eoh Jin-joo. She is standing by at the presidential office of Cheong Wa Dae. Now, so Jin-joo, what is President Park's plan for the coming year?
Conn-young, economic revitalization will be President Park's key focus this year. The president presented a 3-year plan for economic reform, which he said was designed to let more people feel the effects of economic recovery. The president pledged to normalize abnormal practices in society and lay the foundation for a strong economy, starting with reforms in the public sector, including the normalization of state-owned institutions and fiscal and tax reforms. President Park will also be continuing her push for a creative economy over the next 3 years to build what she says is a more dynamic and innovative economy. She introduced her plans, which have been released in more detail in recent months, to set up offline towns for the creative economy in 17 provinces and cities, so that anyone with good ideas can have an opportunity to set up their own business and enterprises can become more competitive with the help of new ideas.
Now, Jin-joo, in President Park's 3-year economic plan, another key focus was boosting domestic consumption.
Yes, that's right. President Park vowed to create an economy that balances domestic demand and exports by supporting SMEs and fostering the 5 major service industries, the sectors of health, education, tourism, finance, and software, that have the potential to create more jobs and are preferred by young people. She promised to provide tailored support to SMEs, whether it be financial or tax support, and make these companies the new driving force for the country's exports to boost the nation's export competitiveness, which has traditionally relied on conglomerates. As for the 5 major service sectors, President Park made it clear that the government will ease or remove most of the regulations on them, except for the ones that are truly necessary. Now, the president predicts that this 3-year plan will increase Korea's potential growth rate by 4% and raise per capita income to as much as $40,000.
Now, Jin-joo, of course, President Park has a plan for the new year when it comes to North Korea as well.
Yes, of course. One of President Park's key goals for this year is also laying the foundation for a reunified Korea. Describing the current situation on the peninsula as severe, President Park stressed that it is now time to prepare for reunification and break away from threats of war and nuclear weapons. She said the biggest obstacle to reunification of the 2 Koreas and world peace is North Korea's nuclear program. The president vowed to closely cooperate with neighboring countries to persuade Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear program and strengthen humanitarian aid to the communist regime. When asked about a possible inter-Korean summit, President Park said she is always ready to talk with the North Korean leader if necessary, but made it clear that the North should take sincere steps first and show its sincerity through action rather than words. She also proposed having a round of reunions for families separated by the Korean War sometime around the Lunar New Year holiday. Conn-young?
All right, Jin-joo, thank you for that. That was Arirang News Presidential Office correspondent Eoh Jin-joo live on the President's New Year's press conference. So from a 3-year economic plan to her hopes to hold a reunion of families separated by the Korean War for the Lunar New Year to, like I said, what she does after work, President Park Geun-hye not only unveiled her roadmap for the nation, but also answered questions that the press as well as the general public might have had in an attempt to get rid of her reputation as lacking communication. For a more in-depth analysis of the president's first ever press conference, we have live on the line Dr. Huang, professor of law at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Huang, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
So this is a press conference that many, both here at home and abroad, have been looking forward to from President Park. Your overall impression of the news conference itself?
I said I was somewhat disappointed. One of the biggest criticisms of President Park was lack of communication, and I think that was a major drive for having this press conference. But at least impression-wise, I think it was a little too scripted and rehearsed. There have been press reports saying that the reporters were asking questions were pre-vetted and questions were vetted and so forth. So there wasn't as much free-flowing back and forth of ideas that I would like to have seen.
All right, but despite all, there were some areas that the president mostly put her focus on. Which areas would you say they were?
I mean, I think in terms of hitting the issues that people are concerned about, she really hit the heart of the matter. I mean, she really focused on economy and she focused on North Korea. Those are the things that everyday Koreans are really concerned about. So I think she did really hit the right issues.
And like you said, there were others that were not addressed as much as the public or her critics might have wanted her to. What were some areas that you would say President Park failed to shed more light on?
On the political side, the whole NIS scandal, I think, was the one driver that really led to political gridlock, and she really dodged the question. So I think that political conversation hasn't really gone anywhere. On the economy side, I think that one of the biggest things that Korea is facing right now is a short-term economic stagnation due to real estate bubble and global financial crisis. And many of the ideas that she discussed were great, and they certainly should help, but I don't really see the big stimulus kind of this policy that would require, as well as long-term economic policies such as education reform and women's labor force participation. Those big item policies I didn't really hear. So I was somewhat disappointed by those two.
Professor Huang, another area that President Park actually really focused on was North Korea, and she in fact proposed a reunion of families separated by the Korean War for the Lunar New Year, which is the end of this month. She also shed light on those defectors from North Korea living in South Korea. Now, what do you think her message was in terms of North Korea?
I mean, she reiterated a principle that she wants to do all she can, but at the same time, she doesn't want to negotiate from the position of weakness. And I fully understand the fact that it's really hard to do anything about North Korea, given how some of the craziest things that is going on in North Korea. So while it is a crucial concern for the Korean government, I can see why there are so limited things that you can do. I mean, yeah, the family reunion programs are great, but overall, thinking about South-North Korea relationship, it really isn't going to change too much.
Dr. Hwang Jung-wook, professor of law at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, thank you for speaking with us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
All of the day's important events close to home, around the world.
The second half last, figure out what winners.
The arts and culture scene and the heart of global business.
Experts added that
Arirang News has your whole day covered.
the legislature will convene a plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government.
The top foreign policymakers from South Korea and the U.S. are due to meet in Washington this week for talks that are expected to focus primarily on North Korea and Japan. While meeting with reporters Sunday local time, South Korea's Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se said he'll relay South Korea's position on Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's recent visit to the controversial Yasukuni Shrine, which is the resting place of several Class A war criminals.
It's not a simple matter between the two countries, but a shared interest of the international community. So I plan to deliver South Korea's stance to officials of all ranks that I meet in Washington.
Now, Yoon and U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry are scheduled to meet on Tuesday, where they will coordinate their North Korea policies following the recent execution of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un's uncle, Chang Song-taek. They're also expected to discuss ways to restart the stalled six-party talks on the North denuclearization. Now, during his visit, Yoon is also scheduled to meet with Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel and Senator Robert Menendez, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Washington is demanding that Seoul increase its share of the cost of stationing U.S. troops in Korea as the two sides prepare to resume talks on that very issue in Seoul on Thursday. Now, Seoul-based Yonhap News reports that Washington is demanding that Seoul contribute roughly $900 million under the new agreement, which is an increase of about 9.2% from the previous agreement, which expired last year. Well, Seoul wants its contribution to be roughly $850 million, given the annual rate of increase under the previous five-year agreement was capped at 4%, and there have been minimal changes in the number of troops and the conditions in which they serve. Now, in the domestic political realm, political wrangling at the National Assembly in the past year has done more than frustrate the Korean public. It's made this parliament one of the least productive in more than a decade. Lawmakers have submitted more than 8,500 bills since the current 19th National Assembly began work in 2012, which is a 23% increase from the previous assembly and a record high in Korean parliamentary history. But this assembly only passed just over 10% of the bills in its first year, the lowest rate since the 16th assembly, which began its term in June 2000. Now, the passage rate in 2000 was about 40%. The National Assembly Secretariat says the reason for the low passage rate is because of the continued wrangling between the rival parties and the subsequent lack of time for deliberation. Meanwhile, independent lawmaker An Chol-soo's plan to form his own political party to challenge the dominance of the two leading parties has taken another step forward. His new politics committee has recruited a veteran conservative strategist as its fifth co-chair. Arirang News parliamentary correspondent Kim Hyun-ji reports.
Eoh-jin, former environment minister and veteran strategist who has long been associated with the conservative bloc, is now officially part of An Chol-soo's team aimed at promoting his vision of new politics. The 74-year-old strategist is known as An's political mentor.
Former Environment Minister Eoh Jin is firmly convinced that Korea is in need of reasonable reform.
Yoon said he felt a sense of responsibility to support An.
I've been thinking that the constant confrontation between the two rival parties has long divided the country into two. I also thought the event of An Chol-soo was a historical inevitability.
Yoon says the ruling Saenuri Party and main opposition Democratic Party are the politics of the first and second generations. He said the ruling party still imitates first-generation politics, which had been authoritarian and nationalistic. Yoon said the Democratic Party has not overcome the street politics of popular democracy of the second generation. The Democratic Party fired back, saying An must first show what his new politics are really about.
An Chol-soo has not revealed whether the color of his so-called new politics is red, blue, or yellow. Merely criticizing the two rival parties will not answer all the questions people have for him.
The Saenuri Party took aim at Eoh-jin, calling him an outdated figure who has migrated from one political camp to another.
We have deep doubts about whether Eoh-jin is the right person for An Chol-soo's new politics.
During the 2004 general election, Yoon helped President Park Geun-hye, then chairwoman of the Grand National Party, now the Saenuri Party, restore the party's approval ratings, which had tumbled after it attempted to impeach late President Roh Moo-hyun. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
A new subsidiary of the state-run rail operator Korail could open as early as this week. The creation of the affiliate is what sparked the nation's longest-ever rail strike last month, with unionized workers accusing Korail and the government of attempting to privatize rail services. Kwon So-ah has this report.
Korail's new subsidiary is a step closer to launch. The state-run rail operator says the affiliate, which will operate KTX bullet trains departing from Suseok, a station in southern Seoul, is beginning to take shape and may open as early as this week. Korail received a business license from the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport at the end of last month and has set office at its headquarters in Daejeon. 50 employees, mainly from Korail, are expected to be dispatched within this week. The workforce will gradually expand to over 400 people. In an effort to minimize costs, Korail plans to hire externally, except for core employees such as engineers and crew members. Once construction of the railway is completed by the end of next year, the Transport Ministry expects an average of nearly 55,000 travelers a day to use the line in 2016. Korail says that as Suseok will be the second KTX departure station in the capital, the internal competition between it and Seoul Station will generate new demand, improve efficiency, and drive bigger profits. However, the labor union still believes Korail's move will eventually open the door towards the privatization of the company. Unionized workers filed a lawsuit last week demanding the government withdraw its license for the subsidiary. Kwon So-ah, Arirang News.
Korea's foreign exchange reserves rose to a record high for the 6th straight month in December. The Bank of Korea said Monday that the foreign reserves held by Asia's fourth largest economy stood at over $346 billion, which is up nearly $1.5 billion from a month earlier. The central bank attributed the rise to a weak U.S. dollar, which boosted the dollar conversion value of non-dollar assets. The euro strengthened 1.4% against the greenback as of the end of last month, while the British pound gained nearly 1% to the dollar. And taking a brief look at how the local stock market is doing, Seoul shares edged higher on this Monday, regaining some ground after hitting a 4-month closing low in the previous session, although the Japanese yen's weakness and concerns about China's economy were keeping investors cautious about local firms' earnings prospects. As of 1:30 p.m. Korea time, the benchmark Kospi was up more than 0.5%, trading at 1956 after shedding 1.1% on Friday. The tech-heavy Kazakh also gained nearly 0.2%, while on the foreign exchange counter, the Korean currency was trading weaker against the greenback at roughly 1,063 won. Now, the U.S. is bracing for a record-breaking chill this week. It's called the polar vortex, and it's an Arctic cold front that's expected to affect 140 million people, or nearly half the U.S. population, with dangerously low temperatures. Connie Lee has more.
After being hit by a blizzard at the start of the new year, people in the Midwest and Northeast United States are now bracing for another blast of dangerous wintry weather. This time, a record-breaking one. The National Weather Service warned Sunday that much of the U.S. will see temperatures that will be the coldest on record in almost 20 years. In a statement, the service said that it may feel as cold as -50 to -60 degrees Fahrenheit, or that's -45 to -51 Celsius, on Sunday night over sections of the north central states. Under these conditions, forecasters warn that frostbite can occur on exposed skin within 5 minutes. The freezing cold temperatures are the result of what's called a polar vortex, an Arctic cold front that is set to descend over much of the U.S. By Wednesday, forecasters say nearly half the nation will be shivering in below freezing temperatures. Officials in several states have now asked residents to take extra precautions in the days ahead.
Cold really scares me, and as such that we will have temperatures that are potentially deadly or certainly life-altering temperatures right now. And we have to be very, very careful with that.
The state of Minnesota ordered all public schools to be closed on Monday ahead of the cold snap, and shoppers in other Midwest states empty shelves at stores to stock up on supplies. The latest winter storm comes after a massive wintry weather system hit the Midwest and Northeast a day after New Year's. The storm killed at least a dozen people, grounded more than 6,000 flights, and forced schools and government offices to close. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
And now it's time for our first arts and culture segment of the week with our Tae-ho. And today, Tae-ho will be starting us off with this week with what looks like the latest movie trend here in Korea. Good afternoon to you, Tae-ho.
Good afternoon.
So what is this trend that you're talking about?
Well, a look ahead to 2014. It looks like the movie trend in Korea, this will be Korean historical movies as opposed to dramas. Let's go ahead and take a look at what the big movies are expected to be this year. 대장금, Queen Sondok, and more recently Moon Embracing the Sun, all very successful Korean historical dramas. With their success both in Korea and abroad, it seems that more filmmakers are willing to take the risk of producing Korean historical movies despite the large production costs that usually go with it. In fact, there are several Korean historical movies already slated for release this year, with the first one being the film The Huntresses on the 29th of January. The movie stars three lovely ladies, Ha Ji-won, Kang Ye-won, and Song Ga-in, and is an action comedy that is based in the Joseon period.
The atmosphere on set is much more lively and fun because neither my character nor the movie has an overly serious or heavy tone.
The next two historical film releases of the year are big-budget films that are slated to face off during the peak of the movie-going season of summer. The first is the film Roaring Currents, which features an all-star cast of Choi Min-sik, Yoo Seung-ryung, and Jin-gu, and is directed by Kim An-min. The story revolves around Admiral Yi Sun-shin's battle at Myeongyang, in which he squared off against the Japanese Navy.
The movie was produced because I was curious as to how 337 Japanese ships could be defeated by just 12.
It will be facing off against the highly anticipated film Pirates that stars Kim Nam-gil and Son Ye-jin. The film is set in the Joseon dynasty and revolves around Korean pirates who fight to catch a gray whale that has swallowed the royal stamp of the emperor. And the historical movies don't stop there. Two more are slated for release in the fall that both feature top Korean stars. The first is the film King's Wrath, which stars Hyun-bin and Han Ji-min, and the second is A Touch of Zen, starring Lee Byung-hun and Jeon Do-yeon. Another highly anticipated film is Kundo, Age of the Rampant, which revolves around a band of thieves from the 19th century and stars Ha Jung-woo and Kang Dong-won.
You know, Tae-ho, they all look like great films to look forward to, especially with the really big-name cast of most of these movies. And I suppose it's safe to say that the trend or the popularity has shifted. Popularity of historical productions, have shifted from the smaller screens to the silver screen now.
Well, it certainly does look that way for now. However, that's not to say that Korean historical dramas will falter off, but I think producers and filmmakers have more confidence in the success of Korean historical movies, especially with the success of Masquerade in 2012 and The Face Reader just last year.
Right, some very exciting films to look forward to. And with that, you'll be filling us in on the highest grossing films of 2013.
That's right. Now, we take a look ahead from 2014 to a look back at 2013 and what the highest grossing films around the world were. The website Box Office Mojo has released its numbers for the highest grossing films of the past year. And the movie at the top of the list features Hollywood star Robert Downey Jr. in an iron suit once again. It's no surprise that Iron Man 3 was the top grossing film around the world, pulling in roughly $1.2 billion at the box office. Those numbers smashed the next highest grossing film, Despicable Me 2, by $300 million. But the animated flick did bring in roughly $900 million, making it the most successful animated film at the box office last year. In third place was a more recent release, the sci-fi adventure The Hunger Games: Catching Fire, which grossed $800 million. Following that was the sixth installment of the always steady Fast and Furious franchise that stars Vin Diesel and the late Paul Walker, raking in $790 million. And rounding out the top 5 for the year was another animated film, the comedy Monsters University, which revolves around the always lovable monsters Mike and Sully during their college years. The film hit $740 million at the box office.
And Teo, I remember you telling me that animated movies, never hit it that big in the cinema scene.
That's correct. Now, it's interesting because 2 of the top 5 movies were animated films. And another interesting tidbit is that 8 out of the 10 in the top 10 were sequels this year, or last year.
Right, and they're one of my favorites as well, or 2 of my favorites are in there. All right, thank you for that update today, Teho, and we'll see you tomorrow.
All right.
And that's all from me at this hour. Thank you for staying here with us. I'll be back with more of the day's latest at 4 p.m. Korea time.